Good morning. Much like the GDP data that came out last week, the Q4 results for India Inc. tell you much the same story. Keep in mind that March had just 1 week of the lockdown. Q4 data for India Inc. tells you that long before the pandemic struck, India Inc. was in deep trouble. The revenue growth for the quarter was down by about 2.5%. Profit before tax was down 28%. So things were bad. As far as the pandemic itself is concerned, I think it is a commentary of companies that is worth looking at. L&T, for example, has told us that they lost 17,000 crores of business during this pandemic period. So that's a sort of a pointer as to what we're going to expect when you get the June quarter GDP data, when you get the June quarter India Inc. numbers. So it's pretty bleak out there. Another bleak story, not surprisingly, is this whole corona package. So we have a story today which tells you about how the positivity rate, which is basically the rate of new infections found as a percentage of the new tests done. So that number, it's risen ninefold for Tamil Nadu. It's almost doubled for Mumbai. You can see the graphic. Those numbers are pretty horrific. And yet, despite this, when you look at a city like Delhi, the government seems to be hell-bent on keeping the number of new tests down to a low. We've talked about it before. We've written about it before. Things have improved slightly in Bombay. I'm told over the weekend the government there came out with a new circular which makes new testing a little easier. So I don't know when Delhi is going to do the same thing. But meanwhile, the Delhi government, it's just putting out one circular after another aimed at the hospitals. You had a very absurd claim by the Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal over the weekend, talking about how he knew that hospitals were charging up to 8 lakh rupees to admit patients. This is money being sought in the black. For some reason, the Chief Minister has not made public the level of information. I mean, in the sense that he hasn't told us where he got information from. And if he had that information, frankly speaking, why didn't he just prosecute the hospital or the official involved? Meanwhile, he launched an FIR against one of the more reputed hospitals in Delhi, Sir Gangaram Hospital. So if you're fighting a battle against the medical staff, if you're fighting a battle against hospitals, and you're not going to do testing, frankly, things don't look too good for Delhi right now. Hopefully, there'll be a change of mind. So in Delhi, the malls have opened up, the shops have opened up. The hotels haven't opened up as yet because in keeping with the severity of the crisis, the Chief Minister has basically said that he's keeping the hotels closed right now because it is possible that he may have to twin some hotels with hospitals. He has done that for 5 hotels already. One of them has gone to court to challenge the decision. We've got to see how the courts react to it. Newly elected CII President Uday Kotak has an interesting interview in our paper today. So what he's basically saying is that, listen, he's telling companies that have strong enough balance sheets to be able to raise money. This applies to the government of India as well. He said, just forget about the valuation. It doesn't matter whether your shares are priced what you think is right, or whether you think that they could go higher. Just go raise as much money as you can because you're going to need it. It's a long haul ahead. So, you need to sit on cash. You need to keep cash to pay people. So just get cash. Uday Kotak himself has done that over the last week. So, he's telling people that given the amount of liquidity that, that OECD countries are pumping in, given the amount of money that there is in the market, in fact, he has a lovely quote out there. He said this is no longer just about helicopter money. It's a dreamliner full of money. So there's a lot of money out there. Just go there, take it, keep it, whoever can. So I think that's very good advice for the central government as well, because we've seen over the years the central government has slowed down its divestment plan, basically because it felt that the price wasn't right of the PSU. So there's some good advice there from the newly elected CII president. He's talking about how it's going to be a long haul. He's explained to people, he's put in context the difference between India and other countries when it comes to the stimulus package. So he's explained why the stimulus package in India couldn't be, as strong as it was in other countries. And always the optimistic, Uday Kotak manages to always look for the bright picture. That's why he's such a savvy investor. He says, let's look at the areas which are underinvested. Let's look at the areas where India is going to invest in a big way. Health and education are two obvious ones there. So, his argument seems to be that instead of just moaning about the past, if companies were to look at the opportunities which this has thrown up, in health and, as I said, in education are two obvious ones. And we've seen over the lockdown that India has had some very good innovation out there. So uh, in the government space, for example, the Maharashtra government has come up with some contactless or less contact hospitals where there's a lot more telemedicine involved. So these are good lessons. We've seen Zoom classes, we've seen work from home, you've seen all of this. So the important thing is that when the opportunity that Mr. Kotak is talking about, when we go to exploit those opportunities, we shouldn't forget the learnings of the pandemic. Another very interesting interview that we have today in the Financial Express is that of former TCS chief, Mr. Ramadorai. Mr. Ramadorai was also the head of the the National Skilling Development Corporation, which is set up by the government of India. So what he's saying, what he's talking about is he's basically making many points. He's saying, one, the workers as well as India Inc. they have been horribly affected by what happened, which is obvious. So he says the workers aren't going to come back to live in a Dharavi kind of situation. He said India Inc. isn't going to bring workers back to make them live in a Dharavi kind of situation. So essentially he's talking about the need for more worker hostels and worker accommodation. I think this is in fact one of the points that the finance minister made in her stimulus package when she said that the government would give low cost loans to worker housing. So so Mr. Ramadorai is talking about that. He's talking about the fact that India has moved a lot, so you can do skilling through the mobile phone. You can do skilling in the facilitation centers that the government has. He talks about the Pan IIT model of skilling for Jharkhand, and he said that's a good model for all of us. So essentially, what he's talking about is sort of a reimagining of India. I mean, so one point that he makes is that India needs to spend about 5 to 10 times what it does today on skilling, and this is not just because of the pandemic. The pandemic has hastened things, but we were already looking at the labor intensity of production coming down. So if you had to provide employment for your 450 to 460 million people, then you just had to do all of this. So Mr. Ramadorai is telling us how it can be done. So that's an interview worth watching. And what's equally important is to see what these organizations like as the Pan IIT network that he's talking about, whether it's top companies like the Tatas, what do they do in terms of CSR funding will obviously should be going into the sector. So we need to look at how India is going to be reimagined. That promises to be very interesting. State governments, we have an interesting bit of news. Their revenues have actually doubled in May. So but the problem is, I mean, they've doubled basically as the lockdown has eased and has companies and have started producing more. We've seen this, for example, even from the e-way bills that are generated by the GST. But this is why it is a really long haul ahead. But even though the number has doubled from April, it's still about 20 to 50% of what it used to be in the old times. So it's a long haul. A lot has been said, and most of it derogatory, in the past about the PM CARES, the disaster fund that was set up by the government for the pandemic. Now, our lead column tries to look at that and explains the fact. I mean, firstly, some of the criticism is quite unfounded. The PM NRF, for example, could also not be audited by the CAG. So there are issues like that which our lead column tries to explore. The larger point that it makes really is that whether it was the PM NRF or the PM CARES, they were both set up to be free of the CAG, the CBI and the CAG for a particular reason. You needed the money to be invested very quickly, and you didn't want to get caught up in the L1 that have I given it to the lowest bidder, is this person competitive, all those issues which typically dog all government decisions and PSU decisions. The PM CARES was meant to take care of that. It tried to bypass that. So the lesson that that the Prime Minister should draw actually, is that this nimble decision making, this is something which he has to make sure comes to the rest of the government. We have some very good examples in that column on how even top bureaucrats like the Niti Aayog CEO Amitabh Kant, even top bureaucrats like that don't feel emboldened enough to take what is obviously the right decision. So that's a big problem, and frankly, whether India is able to get Atmanirbhar, which is what the Prime Minister is talking about, frankly, whether India is going to get Atmanirbhar depends crucially on the Prime Minister's ability to make sure that decision making in the government, in the PSUs gets freed up. And so we need to watch for that in the days to come. Certainly it has not happened so far yet. ICRE Professor Ashok Gulati He's the person who actually first scripted the sort of path that the Prime Minister Modi needed to take as far as agricultural reforms were concerned. This is way back in 2014 and 15, but frankly nothing happened. So he's taking one more shot at it. Ashok Gulati is always the optimist. He's taking one more shot at what the Prime Minister needs to do, and he makes an argument, a very valid argument, that frankly, the Prime Minister freeing up the agriculturists from the mandis, from the APMC, allowing people to buy directly from them. These are all very good moves, and hopefully they'll bear fruit soon. But frankly, if the Prime Minister is looking for a quick solution, he needs to move away from the from the in-kind fertilizer and food subsidies and quickly convert them to cash DBT kind of subsidies. He's had pretty bad luck so far, so let's hope he has better luck this time. This reminds me when Ashok Gulati is talking about what the Prime Minister needs to do in agriculture. I think McKinsey or BCG or PwC, one of these consultant groups, made a presentation to Prime Minister Vajpayee, and they said that if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, so for example, if you free up titling, this will boost GDP growth by 0.32%. If you do that, it will boost growth by 0.65, and stuff like that. So basically, it added up to a pretty picture, and you could see that India's growth had reached 8.5 to 9% based on what these consultants had said. So the Prime Minister was very impressed, and there was pin drop silence when this presentation was being made. So after the presentation was made, everybody kept quiet. They were waiting for their cue from the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister turned to this gentleman from McKinsey or BCG. I think his name was Mr. Gupta. And the Prime Minister turned to Mr. Gupta and said, "Oh, बहुत बढ़िया है Gupta जी, ये तो बहुत बढ़िया है. ये सब करेगा कौन?" So I think that's a critical thing. We all know what needs to be done. The bureaucrats need to know what needs to be done, but for some reason they're not doing it. So that's the question before Mr. Modi. लेकिन ये सब करेगा कौन? Modi साहब. I see from our gadget section that a lot of mobile phone launches that had been put on hold during the lockdown are once again now. I see from our gadget section that a lot of mobile phone launches which were put on hold during the lockdown are once again starting all over again. We're looking at some mid-range phones this time because as our story in Brandwagon also says today, that essentially, because of the fact that there are going to be salary cuts, there are going to be job losses, essentially customers seem to be looking at more of the mid-range phones there. It's interesting, our Brandwagon talks about how, mobile phone companies particularly, but even others, are now looking at a combination of the physical stores as well as the online things. And, as with everything marketing, you have to have a slogan, or some jargon. So what they call it phygital, physical and digital. So one very surprising sort of entry into the gadget section is the new product by Fitbit. It's a health product, so that's what Fitbit does. But it's not the stuff that you wear on your hand or that you can strap onto your chest or something like that. This is a Fitbit ventilator. So it's a sign of our times that even a ventilator is getting covered in the gadget section of a financial daily. But that's the way it is. So have a great week ahead. Thank you.